So Karen, O'Malley, and John finally got their dream, and they took a tour of people from St. Paul's to the great musical communities of Europe. And they were particularly excited to arrive in Venice because Karen has a passion for Ludwig van Beethoven. And so they went to his gravesite in Venice, and as they approached the gravesite, they heard a cacophony. But Karen, because she is such a brilliant musician, realized that it was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony playing backwards. So she explained this to the confused and deluded people from St. Paul's, and just as she finished her explanation, the Seventh Symphony began to play backwards, and then the Fifth Symphony, all of Beethoven's symphonies in reverse order, played backwards. And John was so puzzled, he grabbed the caretaker and said, "What's going on here?" And the caretaker said, "Oh, that's just Ludwig, it's almost Halloween, he's decomposing." There just aren't very many Dia de los Muertos jokes out there. It's a bit of a stretch. So Jesus, in the past 2 weeks' Gospels, this week's and also last week's, says, "What do you want me to do for you?" That's not a bad question for each of us. We want. What do you really want? Because if you really want something, then you're going to have to take certain steps to actualize and implement your desire, or you'll miss your opportunity. And once opportunities are missed, sometimes they just don't come around again. So it's important for all of us to know what we want, lest we lose our best desires on the wild winds of this difficult world. Unless our lives become vagrant and unmotivated, and we have an insufficiently clear course set before us. I know at my last parish I knew exactly what I wanted for the people of St. Edmunds, and I helped the people of St. Edmunds learn and articulate what they wanted, and we made great strides forward. I also know that at one point I began to think about living in Latin America, particularly in Mexico. This was something that I wanted to do. And had I not made it happen with your help, I would have lost that opportunity. And so now I have the good fortune to be here loving you, and part of my job is to help you know what you want for this place, so that we can want it together, and so that we can want it well and effectively, and do those things which will allow us to make St. Paul's the kind of place that we desire it to be. We school our desires in the right direction, and having schooled our desires in the right direction, we broke no obstacle. So we often talk about God's free grace, and God's grace is free, but it isn't cheap. And when we really understand God's grace, we also come to understand that it might cost us everything, and that makes us nervous. It's hard to identify what we really want, and that's why Jesus teaches in this parable today that we need to learn how to see. And in the Gospel of Mark, blindness is often a metaphor for our own hearts, for the difficulty that we have really coming to clarity about what is worthwhile and valuable and worth pursuing in our lives and in our common community. And so, whatever else Bartimaeus is today, he is a metaphor for the blindness in which we all partially walk as we try to define our lives
in worthwhile ways. Jesus is always on the road. He's always going somewhere. And so last week we found he and his disciples headed for Jerusalem. And this week he's all the way down the precarious winding road from Jerusalem in Jericho alongside the Dead Sea and the River Jordan. He is always on the move. In fact, we don't even get into the end of this gospel before he and his disciples are leaving Jericho or some other place. The Greek word used in Mark's gospel is euthes, immediately. Jesus is always on the road, going someplace immediately. That word is used 42 times in the Gospel of Mark. And so Jesus probably calls us to be, on some level, gypsy people. This is no Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree waiting for revelation. This is a first century Jack Kerouac that we follow. So we have to have gypsy hearts, thee and me, as we try and pursue the path of Christ. You know, of all the people that Jesus heals, the only one that has a name is Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. And scholars tell us that is probably so because Bartimaeus became a member of the Christian community. And the first hearers of the Gospel of Mark knew this guy. And they knew his story of healing and his story of them following Jesus along the way. It is hopeful. Bartimaeus advocated for himself. He knew what he wanted. And he spoke up. And those around him in the crowd tried to hush him up. They wanted a quiet day. They probably had their picnic lunches out. The Pinot had been poured. And here is this noisy nobody clamoring for attention. And Jesus stops along the way and gives this insignificant man his attention. That is very hopeful for all of us because each one of us in this room are needy people. We have our needs. We may not even be able to articulate our needs. Jesus will stop also for us on the way. Have you seen Samuel Beckett's play, also a movie that's helpful, Waiting for Godot? You've got to have a certain amount of patience to watch Waiting for Godot. Because Vladimir and Estragona are sitting at a table for the entire play, the entire movie, and they are making plans and resolutions, and they are talking about the future and their good intentions, and they do absolutely nothing. So at the end of the play, Vladimir says to Estragona, "Shall we go?" And Estragona says, "Let's go!" And they sit there. And they do nothing at all. I think we are being reminded that our intentions are worthless unless we act on them. And Bartimaeus is an example of somebody who could have sat in a corner by the side of the road as the procession passed, but instead he advocated for himself in faith and belief and called out to Jesus and made it clear what he wanted. Last week, Jesus asked the same question to James and John, the sons of Zebedee. He says, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they explained to Jesus, who seems not to get it, that they want positions and power and larger paychecks. And Jesus explains to them that he cannot help them in those circumstances. And yet, Bartimaeus seems to be acting in a different kind of faith, and Jesus is able to meet him where he is. There's a fellow who has a great voice on NPR. His name is Noah Adams. And Noah Adams talks about how at age 51, he decided to learn how to play the piano. Now, for those of us who do not have a musical bone in our body, that's not even a desire. That's not what I'm going to tell the Lord I want to do. But Noah wanted to do that at age 51. And so to act on his commitment, he went out, much to his wife's disgust, and bought an upright Steinway. And he began to practice his scales, and it bored him to tears. So sort of like all of us run out and buy Rosetta Stone, he went out and bought a computer program about how to play the piano. And he didn't get very far. It was hard for him to practice. And so he was thinking about, maybe to his wife's delight, selling the upright Steinway, when he heard about a 10-day camp, music camp. And he took himself off to music camp, and there at music camp he met other people who were trying to learn how to play the piano. And he had some great tutors. And he found that he made a little bit of progress, and he stayed in touch with that community after camp and with some of those tutors. And he began to improve. Eventually, in his book, Piano Lessons, he tells us he became a very competent piano player. We'll have to send Karen to see if he's just blowing smoke, but that's what he says, that he became very competent. And yet we walk into church and we expect to have all of this nailed down, don't we? And part of what church is gathering with reasonable tutors and with a community of faith who are trying to learn how to practice the teachings of Jesus and implement them in their lives. And just as you do not become an aficionado at soccer, or an able Spanish speaker, or a great artist in 1 week so, it takes a while to learn how to become a disciple of Jesus and how to live that out in the community of faith like St. Paul's. That is much of what we are doing here together. Now, when Jesus asked for Bartimaeus to come to him, notice what Bartimaeus does. He cast off his cloak. Now that would have been the cloak that kept him warm in the winter. That was all he had. It would have been the coat that he spread out to receive the alms of charitable people, his sustenance. When he heard the call of Jesus, he left that cloak behind, and he would never find it again in the crowd at Jericho. I think we tend to wrap ourselves in cloaks of security, in cloaks of stability, those things that make us feel safe. Sometimes when we hear Jesus saying to us, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" it will mean casting aside our security, leaving our realm of comfort, stepping out to follow Jesus in the way, even as we advocate for our own healing and progression in the faith. Now I am at St. Paul's loving all of you. And I know how I answer that question when Jesus says, "George, what do you want me to do for you?" I say, I want, Lord, for the people of St. Paul's to know what they want and to want the right things for themselves and in your name and for this place, and God will grant me that. We are going to find more and more what we want and how it is that we might be faithful as we strive to become disciples here in this place together. We don't have to have it all straight by next Sunday. Sunday after we do, but not next Sunday. It takes a while to become a great soccer player, a fine Spanish speaker, a good painter. It takes a while to know how to practice the Christian faith. Vladimir and Estragona pretended to want something, but finally they just set it out. How about you? That is not what I want from you. What I want from you is you want what Christ wants want to. Amen.
Amen.